So one of the things, Jeanette, that you said in your introduction that we'll obviously put together for you was that it's not fun to play with your 401k or your asset portfolio. And
Not for me anyway.
Right, no, I
Some
get it.
people may get interested in that.
The reason that it hit me so hard is because I just recently heard a statistic that I think is super interesting, and it's kind of relevant to our area because here in Austin, we're in a college town, right? We've got UT just about 5 miles from here, and one of the things that I found super interesting was that women in general are graduating college 30% more than men in every university, and obviously at UT. And one of the things that I went to a seminar about talked a lot about the fact that women are technically a minority in terms of the home buying arena, if you will, and it is one that has been untapped, and the main reason is due to lack of confidence, right? People don't do things that they're unconfident in. But what was interesting to your point about playing with the portfolio is that women see higher value in investing in real estate than men. Men, for some reason, seem to kind of, for lack of a better term, get off more on, seeing their savings rise and their bank accounts look better, whereas women see more value in investing in real estate. And there's no right or wrong answer, right? I mean, real estate can be a fantastic vehicle for generational wealth or just wealth in general. What are your thoughts on that as far as, empowering women to purchase homes, especially younger women, first-time home buyers especially, after hearing that huge statistical, just rant of mine, what are your thoughts?
We might have read the same article because
Possibly.
I've actually talked about that before in a class that I teach agents on launching their business into luxury, because that statistic actually holds true at all price points. First-time home buyers all the way up to high net worth individuals. The female is generally the driver, and they tend to have more real estate in their portfolio than their male counterparts.
Well, and of course now it's no secret, things are a little slower than they've been in the last few years, and I think as salespeople and especially as real estate professionals, we're always looking for where we can find pieces of new business. And knowing that statistic, that's one thing that it's a little difficult for me as a, bald white guy to go after, college women or even just as women in general. But it is something that I've thought about, and I'm happy to have you here to kind of chat on it. Like, what are some of the things, and this is just a brainstorming activity that we can do to really get in front of some of the, future home buyers that are, these females that they love looking at homes. They know that there's value. They have the money. They have the education. That's why I brought up the educational piece. I mean, those education and finances usually go hand in hand. So, what are some of the things that can be done? Is it first-time home buyer seminars? Is it how do we tap into this wealth that we have right down the street at UT to kind of maybe find our future home buyers not today, but maybe in the next 2, 3, 4 years?
Well, I think for starters, with Austin going through an affordability crisis in the last couple of years, I think the education around wealth building through real estate would be really important. Even in the industry, I didn't know that when I got started. And I think a lot of people have had to move further and further out of Austin, which is not the direction they want to go in. Maybe if they had known how to build wealth long-term in real estate, they might have stayed.
Yeah.
They might have had other opportunities in Austin or at least been able to retroactively process a path to get there. And I think that's something that we're missing in real estate as a new agent. Something that we're not really talking about is how do we work from your end goal? How do we backtrack a plan that starts today?
Yeah,
we can be effective with.
Well, and what does that look like in terms of capitalizing even on the younger generation? I mean, you guys have been in the business for not as long as 25 years, but you're newer to the point where you've learned some new things. And forgive me, but I don't know if either one of you were home buyers. But what are some of the things early on when you were getting into the business or even purchasing a home that you kind of went, "Whoa, I didn't know that maybe other people out there are either afraid to ask or just don't know"?
Oh, I was like, yeah, that's a tough. I'm into my third home now. One thing that I wish I would have known that I am learning a lot now is I wish I would have kept every single one of those homes, and I didn't. So that is definitely advice I would give now. But yeah, I mean,
hang on to the property.
Hang on to them. I lost that, investment. It
Gotcha.
invested into my next property. It's how it, catapulted me to my next home. But I wish we would have found a way to keep it.
Gotcha.
I think that the mortgage industry has a huge opportunity because I think one of the big questions that we always get is how they're going to fund their purchase. And there's a lot of misconceptions on what they need to do to prepare themselves. Like, it's never too early to prepare for success. Like, even at the college level, if these universities might spend a little bit more time teaching some financial literacy, and if they're not going to do it, maybe there's an opening for
Yeah.
someone else to do it, so that they're not finding themselves in a lot of credit card debt or mistakes on their credit that's going to take them so long to get out of. But also planting the seed, like Cassie was just saying, of maybe not selling to get to a bigger house and a bigger house and a bigger house, but keeping it as an income producing asset so that
Thinking
you
more
can
long-term.
retire. Yeah, thinking more long term, definitely. And I've got a very good client. His parents were clients of mine, and now he's 42. I think he was, I don't know, in high school when I first met him. But when he was able to start purchasing, he could not buy a home where he wanted to live, which was downtown Austin. He was renting on 2nd Street. So what he and he came up with this was not an idea I brought to him. He decided he would make his first purchase as an investment property.
Okay.
And he made 4 investment property purchases with us before he moved out of downtown Austin. He owned 4 homes, but his personal residence was a rental.
Right.
And so that's, I think, a way for a younger person, male or female, to be able to get into the real estate business, start riding that wave of appreciation, which we're so grateful to have in Austin, Texas. Take advantage of some of the financing options that exist right now. I don't know your opinion on interest only and some things that, if you're well behaved, interest only doesn't hurt you. But just being empowered and educated, right?
Sure.
To be able to say, well, you can get some investment properties and start using that, building that equity. I mean, the equity that has been built just in the last few years is life-changing, and not just waiting for you to buy your dream home in this perfect neighborhood that might be a decade away from being a reality.
Yeah, I tell everybody that, if you don't own a home, imagine if you would have bought 3 years ago, 5 years ago, because everybody's always waiting for something. And, we're kind of on the topic here of new business, and just to move things along, I wanted to ask you, Jeanette, I come with a mindset of, it's not a scarcity mindset. And I always love to ask real estate agents, what are you doing in this market right now that is kind of helping you generate new business? And everybody's got different answers, but I love especially somebody with 25 years experience. I believe there's a lot of real estate agents that would love to hear your answer to that.
It's very simple. You just have to take care of the business you already have.
Amen.
It will continue to reap rewards. And from a truly benevolent perspective of really asking people where they are, what they need, staying in touch with people. Gosh, I think about people that I dealt with my first 3 or 4 or 5 years when I didn't know that I needed to keep a database, I needed to keep notes, and we didn't have CRMs. I think the other day I sent something out to the team, and it was actually a photo of an old MLS book, an MLS inventory book. And I think it said something like, there was a time where all properties existed in a book with 1 photo and 6 words, and we didn't have lock boxes, and we didn't have GPS. And I remember having change on me so I could use the phone. And
Pager.
somehow or another, we managed to do business. So it's just, there's no better time, I feel, for agents or for the public to get involved in real estate for their personal purchases, for investment, because the data there's just an enormous amount of data, and the data is education that helps to empower and helps us to make the right decisions.
Well, and I like that you mentioned that you're reaching out to these past clients, and you're it's almost as if you're asking for the business, right? You're asking, is there anyone I can help? Is there any? It amazes me the amount of people that initially, when I ask that question, say, well, I've got to keep up with my sphere. I've got to follow up with my past clients, but then they don't say the word that you just mentioned. And it's like, hey, ask what they need. Ask if they need help. Ask if they know anyone that needs help. Because I think a lot of times our past clients, it's good to follow up. It's good to stay in front of them. But they forget that, hey, is there anyone that that I can help? And I know from my experience, I always use the analogy of, everybody's bought a new car at one point in time in your life. You've bought a new car, and the moment that you get that car, within the first couple of days, you start to see your car that you now own everywhere, right? You're like, gosh, I never noticed it, but like, there's my car there. There's my car at that intersection. And I think the same thing goes for our past clients, where you can contact your past client, say hello, ask how they're doing, and typically say, hey, is there anyone that that maybe, even have questions, anyone that I can chat with? And of course, the knee-jerk reaction is, nope, not sure, but you've now planted that seed. And now every time they're out to dinner or every time they're chatting with a friend or family member, somebody's like, hey, you know what? I was thinking about doing this or that. Oh my gosh, you got to call Cassie, because you've asked them to keep an eye out. And it's just like that analogy with the cars. And I love that you said that, because again, it's not as easy as just following up with your past clients. You got to ask them, and there's no shame in that. I think sometimes people don't want to do that because it feels salesy, but I think if your heart's in the right place, there's nothing wrong with flat out saying, hey, is there anyone I can help?
Well, and I think if you keep in mind that real estate is a financial transaction, you aren't just selling to someone, but you are enabling them to build their future, then you're actually providing a service. It really is a mindset of a service attitude and not a sales attitude.
Well, and again, like having your heart in the right place. But yeah, I mean, any other tips or tricks as far as new business is concerned? Because I've got some questions for Alice and Cassie. If you don't have any other nuggets that you're going to share with the real estate community.
Just from a tactical perspective, because I think people want to know a thing. They want to, something that they can grab onto. And it, as old school as it sounds, mailers and picking up the phone has just been, I think I've told them many times, I built my entire business with a notebook, a pen, and a phone. We didn't have all this fancy stuff that everybody has now, but just back to the basics of providing good content in your mailers and having them be targeted. So we rarely just send out something to everybody. We have different databases depending on if it's an investor, or we've got a database just on raw land. We have databases for high net worth, of course, and then maybe more entry-level properties. So when someone is receiving something from us, there was more work that went into it to make sure the right messaging got to the right people.
Love it. Well, and like you said, there's little things that you can tweak, but there's no secret to actually doing the work. I mean, I always joke around and say, look, I talk to people who tell me they're on the keto diet, and you have the Atkins diet and the South Beach diet, and there's all of these things, and you've got high-intensity workouts, and you've got CrossFit, but at the end of the day, there's a tried and true two-step process to losing weight, and that's eat less and move around more.
Yes.
Right? And I think that a lot of people are trying to figure out a hack. And same thing goes for real estate. Pick up the phone, put in the work, do the things that are tried and true, and you're going to see success. Obviously, you want to work smart and not hard, but that core, that base is really what is most important.
You just got to find a way to do what we're doing right now. The more conversations you have, the more opportunities come around.
I agree. So I wanted to kind of ask you guys a couple questions. Again, I from what I understand, and forgive me on this one, but would you guys say that at the moment, as far as the people that you're talking to, are we talking to people that are more buyer heavy or more listing heavy?
Go
Do
ahead.
you want to take that? Certainly in the last year, it's been more buyer heavy, just as a result of rates and kind of the way things have happened with price reductions. But in the last month or so, there's been a pretty strict shift in that. Now it's about 50-50 for us, or for me at least.
So on the buyer side, and one of the things that I've been asking everybody is just as if you could do like a public service announcement to your clients, what seems to be a pain point that buyers are running into that you are seeing on a regular basis, that you almost just want to say, attention buyers, when X happens, here's what you need to do, or anything along those lines, to where you feel like if you could get that word out, it would just make your job a little easier.
interest rates.
Interest rates.
Got to be interest rates. The number one thing I hear is it's too expensive. We don't know where rates are going to go. I tend to find that with rates being high, there's more opportunities for buyers than there probably have been in the last 3 years. So you can be really creative with your offers and your negotiations, but the competition of having an overwhelming amount of buyers in the market makes it really difficult for the buyers that are thinking about waiting to do it. So my advice for them would be get in now. If you don't buy anything now, you're at least seeing the opportunities that are around rather than potentially missing out on the ones that are important to you.
And are you running into issues with interest rates with buyers that are not qualifying due to rate or are just not happy with what the payment is?
I think it's the stigma of coming out of 2.5% interest rates that we saw a couple years ago. That's it's really not I don't think we've ever had interest rates that low,
No.
or at least in the last 30 years, and
Ever.
you would know better. Yeah, so
Ever.
I think
Rates
it's
have never been in the 2.5% range.
Yeah.
I've been in the business for over 25 years.
I think it's just shifting the expectations and understanding that probably not going to see 2.5 again. And I wasn't a homeowner 20 years ago, but you can probably attest to this. Interest rates were 14, 15% at some point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
My
the
first
80s.
house was 13.63%, 1984.
Yeah, I would advise buyers don't let an additional increase in your payment take away from the opportunities that are right there in front of you that might not be there next year when the rates are lower.
Well, and the reason I asked the question on whether or not it's about actual affordability or whether or not it's just sticker shock is and again, I was interested to hear your answer, is because a lot of the client, if you can't afford, you can't afford, right? I mean, let's dispel, if you can't qualify, you can't afford. That's a sticking point, right? I mean, you just can't buy. But if you can, and the sticking point is more along the lines of, well, I don't want to deal with interest rates the way they are now. I wanted them to be lower, or I'm going to wait for them to be lower. I find it interesting, and I know that you don't have the ability to do this as a real estate agent, but I really find it interesting that when you ask that client, like, we call it a strike point, right? Like, what is your strike point? Where do interest rates need to be in order for you to move forward? And then furthermore, one of the things we always talk about in the lending side of things that's always really, really shocking to me is payment is most important. And it sounds so salesy when I say it, right? It doesn't matter what your rate is. It matters what your payment is. And we saw that when interest rates went down, because even when rates were in the 2.5% range, there were people that were waiting for them to go lower. I legitimately had a gentleman that told me that eventually he was confident that the Fed was going to go into negative interest rates because it did happen for a short period of time with England. No, it's a real thing.
Okay.
To where if the banks don't lend that money out, that they're not allowed to even keep like a stockpile of money. And if they don't lend it out, they actually have to pay a premium on the money that's held in their reserves. And so when interest rates go to negatives, you'll start seeing interest rates very, very low. But I don't even want to get into the numbers on that. That's a huge economic problem, and we don't want to be there. But it's one of those things that I've noticed, and you have individuals, it's not that they can't afford, it's just there's something, just something about where rates are or whatever it is. And then when we show them payments, sometimes things change. And then sometimes we show people payments, and I come to find that there's other underlying issues as to why they really don't want to buy. Because even yesterday, we have a gentleman we sent out our closing disclosure to, and he's looking at his monthly payment, and he goes, what if I put down an extra $5,000? And we calculated it, and it made a $28 difference in his payment. And he's like, man, that's crazy. And the same goes for the opposite. What if he were to have financed an additional $5,000? $28 difference in your payment. So I'm sure we can all talk about buyers where they're writing an offer, they're making an offer on a property at $495,000, and the seller's counter at $500,000, which is their asking price. And like, oh, I don't know. We get stuck on this like $5,000, and it's like, do you want to lose this place for $28?
Yeah.
Is that really where your head's at?
Yeah, I think the agent has to be, for any buyer, and sellers too, for that matter, because you need both sides to make a deal, right? The agent has to be very astute at the financial aspect of this, because almost never can a buyer outsave the appreciation. So while they're waiting for the interest rate to do whatever, I mean, that's one of the data points. The other data point is the appreciation, so that property you're trying to buy may indeed end up being at a higher payment because your basis to borrow is a higher payment. And to be able to, for the public to be able to work with an agent and lender who can lay out the actual numbers so that they can they really get it,
Mm-hmm.
that is where you don't miss out on an opportunity. And again, just get that buyer into the ownership
Right. You
mode
got to
so
play.
they
You
can
got to
start
pay to
making
play.
money. You have to get involved,
Yeah.
right? And I think too, if I can add one thing, sometimes you just have to not get that perfect home. It may not be the exact square footage. You may have to concede on more than a handful of things to get in, but I know people that have built homes from the ground up, including myself, and it's still not a perfect home. It
Yeah.
just doesn't exist. So just be willing to compromise so that you can start building a future.
I totally agree.
Yeah, one of my favorite questions to ask is how do you evaluate the risk of waiting? And that tends to open up more conversations and really interesting ways of thinking about buying a home that we might not have gotten to over the phone. So it's one of the best questions that I ask people.
Well, and I
Good
would encourage you
question.
too to ask what that strike point is as far as rate is concerned, because you're not going to get an answer. It's crazy. You're not going to get an answer. And again, here's the next question that I'll just open up to the table, because there's we all can't read minds, but hypothetically, because I've had people say, well, if interest rates come down about 1%, maybe people will start to come off the fence, and we all know that if that's the case, then property values are going to go up, and that conversation's been had a million times. From my experience, you're going to find that all these people that you think will come off the fence, they will come up with another excuse. We all know a potential buyer or seller, mainly buyers, that when interest rates were 2.5%, what did they tell you that they didn't want to buy? Because they didn't want to make offers over asking. They thought that the property values were crazy. And then all of a sudden, things flip awful quick. And it was like, hey, you can get the house you want now, and you could probably get it for under asking, and seller concessions, and everything you want. Are you ready to go? And they're like, no, man, rates are too high. So if it's not this, it's that. So if we know that, okay, and I know some will come off the fence, but what do you think it is? What do you think really is holding back people buying and or selling, with the market being the way that it is, if it's not rates?
I think it's being brave enough to take the first step. I think there's
I was going to say fear.
somewhat of a, I don't want to call it a herd mentality, but people waiting to see who's going to take that first step off the starting line. And I think once it happens and everybody begins to follow, now it's too late. Now you're up there in the boat with everybody else. So
It's kind of crazy to watch, isn't it? And you've been through a couple of these and you see them and you're just like, man, it's almost like here you have a room full of professionals, right, that are qualified, licensed to give advice, and nobody wants to listen to anybody that is licensed or professional or anything along those lines. It's something I find interesting about this business is you can go to an average person and ask them, hey, what do you know about cars? And it's totally acceptable to say, oh, I don't know anything about cars. I couldn't even change a tire. Or what do you know about cooking, right? Oh, I'm a terrible cook. I order in every night. But if you ask somebody, what do you know about real estate? Everybody has an opinion. Everybody has something to say. And people would be embarrassed to admit that they don't know anything about it. Why do you think that is? What's the psychology behind that? Because when we started this, you said, I think there's a lot of issues with younger generations where there's no financial literacy that's being taught in schools and all of this stuff. So wouldn't it be easy to say, I don't know anything. They didn't teach us anything about real estate or loans. But go out to dinner tonight and tell somebody you're a real estate agent, or tell somebody that you're a lender. And the first thing they're going to do is, what are they going to ask you? Come on.
What's
How's
the
the
market?
market?
I
What's-
didn't,
yeah.
right? How's the market? And no matter what you tell them, they already have their own perception of it. They will give you their opinion, and they will tell you all about it.
Well, I think there's just so much information online and on TV that they feel like they are knowledgeable. But as with anything that is broadcast to the masses, it's not detailed enough to be applicable. It's a world of averages. It's a world of blanket statements. And you have to be careful too, obviously, the source. So you flip the channels around long enough and you're going to get opposing opinions on the very same topic the very same day. So that's why it is incredibly important. And I tell people all the time, whether it's me or another experienced, licensed real estate broker. You need to establish a relationship.
Yeah.
And it's not going to hurt my feelings if it's not me, but you need somebody. You can't expect to pull information off the internet or from your neighbor at the mailbox.
You mean I can't learn about everything I need to know on real estate through TikTok?
No, I know a lot about real estate. I've never been on TikTok,
There you
so
go.
that dispels that myth right there.
Well, we're going to change that.
Oh gosh, do I need to learn something new?
No, you're good.
Okay.
You're my guest.
Yeah.
You'll be on there whether you like it or not.
Yay!
Well, that's an interesting point. If I wasn't feeling well, the first thing I would do, and really the only thing I would do, is go see a doctor, get their opinion. It just feels like this is one of those.
And you would
industries-
take their opinion.
I would take, yes, unless I want to go to WebMD and misdiagnose
And
myself.
yeah.
But
Exactly. You go to WebMD, you misdiagnose yourself, but people don't have any problem going to Zillow, who's never been in their home, never been in their neighborhood, never doesn't know
Right.
anything about appreciation rates, velocity of sales, price banding, all the things that we use to put together an analysis. But they want to just pull that Zestimate off and call it a day.
Yep.
well, I think Jeanette, you would.
Testament.
Go ahead.
No, I was just I hear that often.
Well, one of the most impactful things I see, especially from you, Jeanette, is whether you're speaking or you're listening, you have a notepad out and you're taking notes. And I think as educators in the business, it's really important that we are constantly studying what's happening in the market. So it's not just we help people buy and sell homes, but we spend time every single day learning about what is impactful to buyers and sellers depending on the condition of the market. And same as doctors would with clinical literature and anybody out there who's in science that wants to learn, that's kind of the way it goes. So
Well, I like that you bring up medical because at the end of the day, they call it a practice when it's medical, right? And I kind of feel that real estate is similar to that because, again, you'll attest to this. I'm sure you've done hundreds of transactions. I have too. None of them are all alike, right? They really are. And there's things that are ever changing. I tell people that want to get into this business, you will probably be able to learn 80% of what you need to know in your first year or two. And that extra 20% you will never, ever learn because this business is always changing. The situations are different. The people are different. The houses are different. The market is different. It's always changing. And yeah, it's a practice. So having those, one of my pet peeves, but it's also one of the things that I also hang my hat on is when someone says, oh, well, I've been in the business for 20 years. And don't get me wrong, there's agents that have been in the business 20 years that do 2 transactions every year for 20 years. But if you're doing some serious numbers or managing a team where you're overseeing serious numbers, you have seen so many different transactions. There's no WebMD or Real Test or TikTok or anything that is going to give you that sort of experience level from actually being involved in those transactions. I mean, you've purchased, 3 homes in your entire life,
Yes.
right? I mean, imagine being involved in 3,000 purchases. Like, it is completely different. Sure, it wasn't my money, but I was there. So
Yeah.
food for thought for anybody who's, doing self-diagnosis. Be careful. That is not best practices. But, moving on, I know Cassie and I talked a little bit about, some of the things before we got on that I really wanted to touch on. She was mentioning to me that in this market, obviously we know the last few years, it's really been a seller's market. You as a seller could just damn near stick a yard sign in your front yard and you'd have a multiple offer situation. And so now we're running into situations where people are selling and it's not uncommon for them to think that their house is going to sell for way more than what the market will bear. So I wanted to open it up to you. Not only what do you do in that situation, but more importantly, like, how do you tell a client what the house is actually going to sell for? What's that process look like?
I mean, definitely. Well, for one person, have a heart. You're talking to a person that cares and has got to understand their vision.
Yeah,
and
there's emotion.
There
They raise
you go.
children in that
Emotion,
house.
yes.
They may have lost a loved one. You have no idea what's
Right.
going on. A house is a home.
Right.
I hear ya.
Exactly. And then it's data, and it's sharing the data, and it's, I even just in the brief, first initial, meeting, it's showing them, the MLS and comparing comps and what one has done compared to another, and even and now, like, renovations have levels. There's, your base level, and it goes up from there, and each of those levels have different values. So it's also, again, communicating that data to make sure that client and person understands.
So let's unpack data, because not everybody that is watching this is going to know what you mean. What are we talking about in regards to data?
Oh, so homes sold, square footage, time, like even looking at how far back.
Okay.
Jeanette's even mentioned like the price banding that we do, like just even seeing the ranges of prices, the dates. Gosh.
So what's
Well,
the
like-
biggest misconception from a seller when they think their house is worth more? Are they, from your experience, are they typically, they don't know what you know, so are they going off of square footage, or are they reaching for those comps that are just way too far back? Are they trying to compare their property in terms of quality to like maybe the neighbors? And I know all of those are things that you're running into, but what seems to be the biggest misconception, the one that everybody seems to go, well, this is because, and you're like, no, that's not a thing.
Sometimes I think just that unrealistic vision. I think that emotion, sometimes they don't see their house in the true light.
Is it possible it's because they have put so much money
Yes.
into a house that they now feel like they deserve to get all of that money back out of the house and then some?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Would
And
that be the
that's-
biggest misconception, or?
Uh,
I mean, I don't run listing appointments, but I would just think I could totally see someone saying, here's what I think my house is worth because I put X amount of dollars into this house, and that's where I'm basing it off of. I put $100,000 into this house. I paid $350 for it. I put $100,000 in. I've been here for 2 years. It's got to be worth at least $600. That's where I'm coming up with my comps.
yeah.
I mean, it's usually just based off of misinformation.
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
So many times I've heard people say, well, my neighbor got X, and I look it up, and actually they didn't. And an additional data point that we bring to our clients is the conversations that we have with
Yes.
so we'll put together a group of sales that we think are relevant. I like to use the word relevant instead of comparable, because we know that buyers may, jump over to neighborhoods.
Right.
They may stay in the same school district, but not in the same neighborhood, and maybe the other house isn't exactly the same, larger or smaller, different bedrooms, pool, no pool, but it's relevant. It's meaningful in terms of where the buyer would be comfortable purchasing, because this is what historically has happened in this space, in this geography. But when we're pulling those relevant properties together, we're not just looking at the numbers on the screen. We're going to pick up the phone. We're going to call the two agents that were involved in the sale, the listing agent and the agent who represented the buyer, and we're going to get the data behind that number. So often we will discover that there was a significant $30,000 repair that is not recorded in the MLS because it's not a required field.
Right.
You're going to find out that comp had a new roof, it had 2 new ACs, things that are not evident by just looking through the photos. Sometimes we talk to the listing agent and the buyer's agent on the same home, and I'm thinking, are we talking about the same house? I mean,
Right.
They have very different perspectives, and equally, the properties that are active, we're going to ask the listing agent, are you having traffic? Have you had offers? What have those offers been like? Why have they fallen off? Why could you not come to a mutual price? All of that is data that is very valuable in establishing where the price should be in the not just the possibility, but the probability of selling at the price that the seller expects, because sellers are always looking backwards, what happened last year, what happened 6 months ago. Buyers are always looking forward, and that's what creates this chasm of expectations. So just acknowledging that with the seller to say, you're looking at what happened 3 months ago, 6 months ago, but the buyers who are on auto searches on every platform known to man, every morning they're waking up and seeing price reductions.
Yeah.
I mean, not always, right? It depends on the situation. But if they just see one, that's all they remember. In their mind, they want to make sure they're making this purchase that is indeed, legitimately going to carry them into the future. And the sellers are just thinking about what their neighbor got a year ago when they should have sold.
I see. Well, I mean, at the end of the day, Jeanette, with the detailed answer that ultimately boils down to You got to do the work. You got to do the research. You've got to show the numbers. You can't just come out of the sky with a random number. I love it.
Yep.
One of the things I wanted to ask the two of you, just so you guys could get some more time, is there anything that you want to ask a lender? Are there any questions that you have from buyers that you thought that we don't want to turn you into a lender, but we want to make you at least lethal enough to know what you're talking about? What type of questions do you get from your buyers and sellers that is lending related that you kind of go, man, I wish I had somebody here to answer that for me?
I think the number one question is, where do you see rates going throughout the course of next year?
Mm-hmm.
That's why we partner with some great lenders like you, Matt. And I think the question for you would be, where do you see rates going? And knowing that direction, what would be your best advice for a buyer today?
Well, my line has been, I used to feel like I was really good at predicting that exact question, but it has been so crazy over the last year, and I've been telling everyone my crystal ball is broken, right? It really is. If I knew exactly, then it would be my job would be a lot easier. One thing that I do think about, to me, mainly, my answer is different based on whether or not you currently own a home or if you own a home now. Because if you do not own a home, it doesn't matter where rates are going to go. Plain and simple. Rates shouldn't matter to you. You kind of like what Jeanette said. You need to get into the game. You need to be involved. You need to stop renting. And again, going back to what I said, imagine if you would have bought 3, 4, 5 years ago. Even if rates weren't 2% 3 years ago, what if they were 7%? You bought. Look at what the market has done. Look at the accumulation of equity. And the reason that I bring this up is because we can all look back just to a few years ago, and we just talked about the buyer that said, well, the reason that I'm not getting involved right now, even though rates are so low, is because I don't want to make offers over asking, and I don't want to get involved in the multiple offer situations. Well, I'm here to tell you that from the financing side, the main reason, and because I'll never forget this, a buyer said to me, who are these people that have all of this money that are able to go ahead and make these offers way over asking price? It's crazy. Well, I'll tell you, the majority of them were homeowners that sold their properties and have this massive amount of equity that they look at as monopoly money. Because I can tell you firsthand, it is much harder for an individual to part with a savings account, a checking account, or any kind of money market account than it is for them to part with their $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 worth of equity. So if you're the type of person right now that doesn't own a home and is waiting for lower interest rates, I can promise you, when you go toe-to-toe with everybody else that's a move-up buyer, they are going to blow you out of the water with their equity, and you're going to ask yourself, who are these people with all of this money? Well, it should have been you 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 7 years ago, but you refused to play, and now you're playing against people who've been in the casino since 10 o'clock, and it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and you're going, why do we have to play in the high rollers room? Why? It's like, well, because you weren't here when the $10 bets were happening, right?
And that will continue.
Of course.
And that's why I know it may sound salesy, but say, when's the best time to buy right now, and it really is true, because we have the benefit of historicals, even after shifts in market, after 9/11, after 2008 into 9 and 10. So we have the benefit of that data, and so history does repeat itself. And we know that after a shift down, we see a lot of escalation in appreciation. And so, again, if it's not the perfect house, it just needs to be a house.
Get in the game, buy in, right? Go to the cage at the casino and cash in and, let's play. So that's my answer to someone who doesn't own a home, right? It's a very easy, broad stroke answer. To somebody who currently does own a home and asks me about interest rates, typically I kind of go for the exact response that you gave about, selling, where there's a home involved, there's emotion involved, right? And if you currently own a home and you're looking to purchase a new one, I want to know why, and I want to know how important that new purchase is to you. Because if you're going to say things to me like our family's growing, or I'm moving for a job, or I just got married and my house is smaller and I don't have space, and I have a wife now that lives with me, then interest rate, it shouldn't matter as much, right? Let's look at what your budget is. Let's see what you can afford, because one of the things I think we've really forgotten over the last 3 to 5 years is, yes, we can talk about equity and we can talk about the importance financially of owning a home. But in reality, this is a house. This is where you're going to live. This is where you're going to create experiences, memories. You're going to have some people over for Thanksgiving. I did a thing jokingly, and I said, I'm done trying to go over all of the financial benefits. buy a house for your kids and buy a house for your dog. There it is. Like, do it, right? Do it for the real reason. And I don't know. I just think we need to get back to that a little bit. Because, again, if somebody were to say to me, hey, I own a home now, and I'm thinking about buying a new one because I really want to try to make, like, a good financial jump, and I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what rates are going to be. I can go off of data, and we can look at indicators, and the only thing I can say is all the data points to they will go down. When? I have no clue. No clue. But I know when they do, you will find yourself in a position where you'll probably turn around and tell me that you no longer want to buy because we're in multiple offers and so on and so forth.
Or prices have gone up.
And the cycle continues.
Yeah.
But that brings me to something I have to ask you.
Uh-oh.
So Jeanette probably won't remember this, but I met Jeanette probably 3.5 years ago, and I did a presentation. I don't even remember what my presentation was necessarily about, but I was talking to the team. And I remember asking the team, like, what are your pain points and everything along those lines? And at this time, it was when it was a seller's market, and you had agents that, I'm sorry, and this is I have to tease agents about this. I would run into agents that would be like, I don't even deal with buyers. I just want listings. And now, like, now they want nothing to do with listings. But I remember everybody was like, how do I get more listings? Like, that was the thing. Like, how do I get more listings? And I said, what do you think it is that's keeping some of the people that are interested in selling their homes? What do you think it is that's keeping them from selling, right? And people raise their hand and say, well, a lot of them think that they need to make home improvements, and some of them think this. And Jeanette came in and goes, oh, I'll tell you right now, the majority of them that are holding off because they think they're going to get more. They think they're going to get more for their property if they wait. And so here we are, and it's easy to look back on, but how many of those clients did you talk to, and what does that all look like, and what are your thoughts on my short story?
It's so painful to sit down with those people. I mean, there's a lot of them are good long-term clients, and for whatever reason, they just could not put their home on the market when prices were really high. And for some of them, it's like a 30% differential.
Well, and to be clear, I mean, we know that you guys focus on the luxury market. So when we're talking about percentages, I mean, 30% of 100,000 compared to 30% of like 3 million.
Sure.
Is a big difference.
It can be multiples of millions of dollars, and it's sad, but I don't know what to tell you. I mean, I told you everything you needed to know.
We know what you're thinking, but yeah, I hear you.
Just have
this
to
is
do
recorded.
It is a responsibility, of course, and that kind of goes back to what we were talking about. Some agents are afraid to pick up the phone and talk about the business and ask for the business and be. I mean, you could use the word pushy, but I use it. You are advising. I mean, back to the medical analogy, if you were doing something the doctor knew was going to hurt you, they're going to tell you, go stop doing this or go get this test, and you may do it or not, but your life is on the line, right? And in certain aspects, your life is on the line when it comes to finances, because we're all going to get old. Everything we're doing, every decision we make, every single day gets us closer or further away from that freedom number. And you don't want to be 80 years old and still having to work.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to be 60 years old and still having to work. So, it really is, your life is on the line in terms of lifestyle, your dreams, what you want to do for your family, the legacy that you want to leave. And so maybe somebody might say, well, you were pushy. I mean, most of my clients say I should have done what you said to do. But I think if you're in this relationship with your clients and you do have the data, you are coming from a servant's heart in an advisory role, whether they take your advice at that moment or not, you have done your duty. And eventually you will be in business with them in some aspect or another. And all you can do is be armed with information, really come from the place of helping people, and the rest is up to them. People will sometimes not get out of their own way, and there's nothing that we can do about that. But they never turn to me and say, why didn't you tell me?
Right.
I haven't heard that one time.
So you can lead a horse to water.
You cannot make them drink. Have you heard that?
Gotcha.
Yes, a little bit.
Well, we're going to wrap up here soon, but I want the two of you to briefly think of, we know What's an aha moment or just a situation that you've had maybe in the last few transactions that, was something that you didn't maybe know right away or that you knew, but then when it happened, you were like, oh my gosh, like this is it. Whether it be something that you had on a listing appointment or something that you had with buyers where you were having a conversation or something happened and you went, okay, like I need to remember this, whether good or bad.
Oh my gosh.
I think I've already mentioned it. Asking people, how do you evaluate the risk of waiting, or how do you evaluate the risk of not doing what you're thinking about doing?
I like it. And that was the aha moment where you're like, I'm going to use that again. Like,
well, people make up their minds, and they're pretty stern with it.
mm-hmm.
So by asking questions, you force them to either get to a conclusion or to hit a brick wall. So
I gotcha.
I'm an educator and an advisor, but I can't make you drink the water. So
Yeah, there you
I'll
go.
ask you enough questions until you realize that maybe the realities of the market is not what you've interpreted. Maybe it's a little bit different.
Yeah, and for you, Cassie, just to rephrase it, I mean, what's like a pain point or an obstacle that you've overcome, whether it's an objection from a client or, even a success story where something wasn't going well and it turned out to be all right?
Yeah, I mean, I did have a younger couple buying, their first home. They were having to wait longer than they wanted to. It was in an apartment, and they, it to me, it always goes back to that having the heart and being service, minded, and they ended up having a fire in their apartment.
Oh, wow.
And so I had to really, just kind of just be there with them. And it was, I don't know, I guess, the aha moment for me was just how much I was there to help them through such a, unfortunate situation and, work with it. The lender was his mom.
Mm-hmm.
So became just part of their family and worked with them through a painful moment and then had that aha moment of their joy of their first home and just how ecstatic they were and went through a lot to get there.
So to be clear, as a real estate agent, you mean to tell me that you do more than just open doors and show people properties?
Yes,
Unbelievable.
totally.
Because
And I love
here
it.
to
Believe
tell
it.
you, I'm here to tell you that's what the majority of the public thinks that you do.
No,
And so there's way more than meets the eye.
if that's all there was to it, I wouldn't be here.
Gotcha.
My family could tell them differently. You're going to do what? Well, yep. Well, I always say if it's not illegal, immoral, or unethical, we will do it.
Yep.
There you go. Well, we always say at Gold Star that there's only two things you really need to be, and that is in compliance and profitable.
Yeah.
That's it.
I'm
If
gonna
you're
steal that.
profitable and you're compliant, you're good to go. So, do you guys have anything that you want to touch on? Is there anything that you want to cover that we didn't cover? Things that might have come up throughout the talks that you're like, oh my gosh, I kind of wanted to chat a little bit about.
Yeah, I'll go back to the point of the disconnect between agent pricing and homeowner pricing.
Mm-hmm.
And I've learned this a lot from Jeanette, but our job is to educate you on the reality of the market. Very often it's interpreted differently by a seller than it is by the agent. And it's common because the data and the statistics that we have access to, most average buyers or sellers do not have access to that. Texas is a non-disclosure state. So pretty simply put, we have access to data into the hidden market that other homeowners don't have. And that's where the disconnect happens.
I gotcha. Well, before we cut loose, Cassie, I want you to look right into that camera and I want you to tell me why you got into real estate and how much you care about the clients you work with.
For real?
Yeah, look right into that
I
camera.
feel like I just said it, but I do love what I do. I love people and I love helping, just even from, owning my catering business and helping people through big wedding days. Now it's helping people buy and sell homes, and I absolutely love it and I'm here for it.
Because she cares, guys. That's why.
And thank
do.
you.
Yeah, my
Because
pleasure.
I think that the communication and the conversation is what we need more of.
Yes.
Well, keep this in mind, and this is something I've been telling everybody. Like this, again, kind of to Jeanette's point, like this is like going to the gym. We can't just do one podcast and think that you guys you're gonna have enough social media to go around. This business is ever changing. The topics are always changing. What our clients need to know and be informed about is always changing. So you need to make sure that we keep up with this, and it gets more fun. It gets easier. I promise. All
I hope so.
right, guys. Thanks.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.